Hey guys, it's Vocal Pineapple, and right now in the manga for My Hero Academia, it seems like we're actually gearing up to see the end of the hero known as Endeavor. So in this video, as we continue our series in covering various stories that have gone on in My Hero Academia, instead of talking about the end of Endeavor, I wanted to talk about the day where he got his start. But before we get to the big battle in Kyushu, this story actually begins elsewhere, at the reveal of the top 10 hero billboards. We don't have to go over every single hero who was introduced during this period. In fact, some of them are already dead, but the two that we're going to focus on in this video, at least for this moment, are Hawks and Endeavor. This was the introduction in the story for Hawks, and in my next story video, I am going to be covering Hawks' backstory and discussing how he became a hero. But Hawks, of course, we see is the kind of hero who lives pretty fast and has a sort of lackadaisical nature compared to all the other heroes who are on stage. And when he meets Endeavor, it's at a very interesting moment in Endeavor's life, because now Endeavor, after the end of All Might at the hands of All for One, has been given the title of #1 hero, which is something that he's always wanted, but not like this. We know that in some regards, everything that Endeavor has ever done in his life, even having his children, has been in an effort to surpass All Might, and now he's actually done it, but it's not because of any work that he actually did, it's more so because All Might just can't continue. So not being satisfied, sure, Endeavor does have the title of #1, but he tells the crowd to watch him so he can truly prove that he does deserve that title. Now elsewhere, we know that Dabi and the League of Villains at this point are not living the best life, and Dabi actually leaves the abandoned warehouse or the abandoned building that the League of Villains are hanging out in to say that he's gonna go look for new recruits. But eventually what ends up happening is the League meets the Doctor, and upon being teleported to his location, Dabi is given time to inspect the high-end Nomu for the Doctor and is even given the opportunity to test it out. Now, if you watched our The Day That Touya Todoroki Became Dabi video, you know that there actually is a relationship between the Doctor and Dabi, because the Doctor was the person who originally saved Dabi after Dabi burned up on Sokoto Peak when Endeavor was looking for him on that fateful day. And I believe that the exchange between the Doctor and Dabi, where the Doctor is wondering how Dabi survived, and Dabi makes it very clear that he survived pretty much just off of rage, something in there made the Doctor want to give Dabi the chance to actually test out the high-end Nomu. And of course, I'm sure Dabi's response was something like, well, what better way to test the power of this high-end Nomu than testing it against the new #1 hero? It's around this time that the Public Hero Safety Committee had Hawks get in contact with Dabi, and we know that before Dabi ever brought up Hawks to the other League of Villains members, he had different tests and things that he wanted Hawks to go through. One of the things we saw, of course, was that he wanted Hawks to just outright kill another one of the top 10 heroes and bring him to the League of Villains, but the first thing he wanted Hawks to do was set up Endeavor at a specific time and location. Now, the Nomu program stuff is really interesting when you look into it, enough to possibly make it into a whole other video, but the Nomu program is the same program that the Doctor is using to try to make a perfect vessel for All for One. They go through various different stages to create the kind of person that can handle having multiple quirks in their body, and a byproduct of trying to develop the surgery that was eventually used on Shigaraki to make him the perfect vessel for All for One were these brainless soldiers that can handle having multiple quirks imprinted on them that we call the Nomu. Now, high-end Nomus are a version of the Nomu that are a lot less brainless, considering that they have parts of the original personality on the body that they're from still left in play, so that the high-end Nomu themselves can do various decision-making tasks and also get smarter as they develop. And often people with very specific personalities are taken, because getting the perfect personality matched to the kind of goal that you're making the Nomu for is very important for these special high-ends. So for the high-end Nomu that we know that Endeavor is about to fight, that was actually made from a quirk user who was a cage fighter, and we actually do go on to see that character in My Hero Academia Vigilantes, and you can learn all about that in my Mirko's backstory video. Now, beyond just the fact that these high-end Nomu are dangerous, they also already have a link to the Todoroki family plotline, because a lot of these high-end Nomu that the Doctor has actually come from facilities similar to the one that Dabi was taken to, or I guess Touya was taken to, after his incident on Sokoto Peak. Now, as Endeavor and Hawks have a small celebration lunch based on the fact that they're now both in the top 2 of the top 10 heroes, under the guise of Hawks trying to give Endeavor information on various Nomu attacks happening around the country, we actually see Hood, the high-end Nomu, interrupting the meal and putting everyone into danger before All Might gives it a jet burn and sends it flying, and steps out of the restaurant on the 70th floor of the skyscraper to have this battle in the sky. Now, this is actually the first time that we've seen Endeavor flying, but that's not really how he describes it, with him saying really it's more like him just not falling. And we do see that Endeavor did do a decent amount of damage with his first attack on the high-end Nomu, but this is where everyone here learns that the Nomu is able to regenerate, and regenerates very easily from everything that Endeavor was already able to do to it. Endeavor thinks back to the Hosu incident when the League of Villains released a bunch of Nomu on a small town during the Stain arc, and he remembers one special black Nomu that he did fight that did have regeneration, but he realizes that this Nomu is a cut above even that one because it has the ability to speak. So Endeavor, realizing that he has to take this thing alive, uses a Hell Spider move because he's expecting this fire to cut the Haya Nomu into small enough pieces that he can just retrieve one piece of the brain to get information from it. But the Haya Nomu completely dodges through his Hell Spider like Spider-Man dodging through bullets, and ends up hitting Endeavor with a strong lariat as its hand wraps around Endeavor's neck and extends all the way into the building, sending Endeavor slamming into it. Now this isn't the end, as the Haya Nomu clearly doesn't care about all the people in the restaurant on the floor that Endeavor has crashed into, because it pushes Endeavor further and further through the building, tearing through and past people as it continues its battle with the #1 hero. And it's here we see an amazing technique where the Haya Nomu pretty much whips Endeavor around inside of its hand after wrapping its hand all around Endeavor's entire body, and this tears through the building, but we do see Endeavor turn himself into a weird sort of UFO thing spitting out of it with all of his fiery power, and even some blue flames mixed in there, showing you how serious Endeavor is getting. Now as the top half of the skyscraper that they were fighting next to starts to fall, we actually see Hawks using all of his different feathers to get every single person out of the building in time, as Endeavor uses a Hell Spider to destroy the building into small parts so it doesn't crash down on the people below. And this is a very impressive effort from the #1 and #2 hero, because there wasn't a single casualty, despite the fact that all these people were sitting in this building and a giant Haya Nomu ended up attacking. They were all still saved by the power of Fierce Wings and Endeavor's Hell Flame. So as the Haya Nomu now starts recovering from Endeavor's attack, local heroes on the ground start trying to support Endeavor and Hawks, and this only makes the Haya Nomu annoyed as it releases lower level Nomus from his body to go on and then attack those heroes, which is a very dangerous ability since this is an enemy that can spawn enemies that most people aren't ready to deal with. It's here where Endeavor realizes this is not good, because this thing is regenerating all over again and I'm starting to overheat, and we know that Endeavor has a certain point that he can't go beyond where his body reaches a temperature and he just ends up fainting or not really be able to use his body the way that he's supposed to be able to use as a fire user. This is exactly why he wanted a son like Shoto who could cool himself down, so that technically there would be no upper limit to the level of fire that he can produce. Endeavor gets angry at the Haya Nomu pretty much figuring out exactly what's going on with him and the fact that he can't use his heat anymore, and instead of giving up, he turns the heat up to 11, actually extending the fire way beyond his body as he prepares his signature move. News crews on the ground start to capture footage of the fight, saying Endeavor's so bright even at this distance, he's gonna try to take the Haya Nomu down with his intense flames all in one move, just turning into dashing lines standing in all of that heat. And despite the fact that the Haya Nomu tries to launch its arms and launch itself at Endeavor, Endeavor releases his strongest ability, Prominence Burn, which is a massive basically cannon of heat that comes from his body, or cannon of fire of compressed superheated flames that he can shoot out of his body like a large fiery Kamehameha. And the Haya Nomu seems like it's actually taking a bit of this, but Endeavor realizes that now more than ever he can't afford to look weak, so he powers it up even further, completely wiping away the body of the Haya Nomu. But the issue is, a little bit of its head managed to get out of the blast, and from this it does begin regenerating again, but the first thing that it does is actually hit Endeavor with an attack from the side that he couldn't see. Now Endeavor, not really being able to react to this, does actually lose part of its face, with it seeming like he might have even lost his eye, but we know later on Endeavor does actually keep the eye, surviving the situation with a really wicked scar to now match Shoto, who has a scar on the same side of his face. The other day we did do a video discussing the Muscular versus Deku fight, and again I find it really awesome that it seems like Endeavor and Muscular do have the same exact scar, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think Horikoshi actually did make a comment on the fact that he accidentally gave Endeavor the same exact scar as Muscular. Around the country we see news broadcasts going on about the fight between Endeavor and the Haya Nomu, and at UA we see several of the students watching the battle, with Shoto shocked at the fact that his dad got this grievous injury. All Might in another location watches the fight with 13 and Present Mike, and he has a feeling in his stomach where he was injured that probably really hurts a lot extra right now, because more than anybody Endeavor probably wants to be out there helping Endeavor, considering that Endeavor's only in the situation because of him. Now the Haya Nomu stands over Endeavor, who is now out unconscious on the ground, and it seems like this is the end of the fight between Endeavor and the Haya Nomu. And it's here where people begin making comparisons to what just happened months ago in Kamino Ward between All Might and All For One, saying we're seeing this all over again with the person who's supposed to be our #1 protector losing the battle. But somehow it's like Endeavor heard this, right? And he was like, no. Y'all aren't gonna start comparing me to All Might's failures if you wouldn't compare me to All Might's victories. And he actually gets up and starts attacking the High-End Nomu even more, reigniting his flames and ignoring the fact that he can't see out of one of his eyes. But Endeavor is still too slow for the High-End Nomu, who whips Endeavor around and throws him into a nearby building. And this also makes it on the news, with people seeing Endeavor pretty much getting back up and trying to do his second assault on the High-End Nomu, and then more or less getting cast aside. So it still doesn't look like things are going in a good direction. In a cab watching the fight, we also see Natsuo and Fuyumi kind of concerned. Natsuo showing the first bit of concern that he's actually ever shown for Endeavor in the series by saying that if Endeavor can't beat the High-End alone, he really needs to wait for reinforcement. And that Endeavor more than anyone should understand that he can't be another All Might. He can't be like All Might, who took care of everything on his own, so why is he trying so hard? At this point, the High-End Nomu has kind of ran away from Endeavor looking for someone else to fight and jumps into the crowd, causing utter chaos as everyone gets really scared and starts running away, and society seems to start breaking down because the news says no one has a symbol to look at as the person who's absolutely gonna win. Now, no one thinks that they're safe, and especially with Endeavor losing, it's kind of like, well, if he's not gonna protect us, it's every man for himself. But we see a kid in the crowd who says, no, screw that, everyone. Why are we running away and being all panicked? Endeavor is still alive and fighting. The flames are still there. He's still going. We all have to support him now at this point, instead of trying to run away and making things even worse. The kid gives a really impassioned speech to the crowd, saying right now, who's the man risking his life for our sakes? Look, it's Endeavor, the #1 hero, and we all have to watch him just like he told us as he shines and shows us exactly who he's supposed to be. Endeavor fires up and begins shooting his body towards the High-End Nomu, saying that for a while he hasn't been able to move his body, but right now all he can do is use his flames. So that's exactly what he uses to propel his body forward, just using the heat as he breaks past all of the High-End Nomu's defenses, even though it starts to stab him with its tendrils. And we see this epic sort of DBZ battle between the High-End Nomu and Endeavor flying through the air, and I love when animation gets like this and they just turn to two little strings in the air. It's just always so hype. But Hawks comes in and offers Endeavor a little bit of a reprieve because he ends up distracting the High-End Nomu for a second, giving Endeavor a moment to position himself. This is where we find out that Hawks has actually always been watching Endeavor because he believes that Endeavor is the one hero who tried to live up to All Might's shoes. He's the one person who tried to surpass him, and for that he gained Hawks' respect. Now again, later today we also are going to have a video all about Hawks' backstory, so you can expect to know even more about the tie between the young hero and Endeavor, because it definitely goes deeper than just Hawks having respect for Endeavor because of that reason. But it's here when Hawks pretty much gives up on being able to do any damage to the High-End Nomu, and he adds his speed to Endeavor's firepower by putting his wings on Endeavor's back, allowing Endeavor to spread his wings like a phoenix, and we actually do see a big fiery set of wings behind Endeavor, shooting him forward towards the High-End Nomu at breakneck speed. And as Endeavor finally reaches the High-End Nomu, he hits it with an amazing fiery punch, and this is probably the first time that we're actually seeing another one of Endeavor's signature moves, the Vanishing Punch. And since this is actually probably the first time that he's used it, he might not have had a name for this technique yet, but it does very much echo what we see when he does use that. But even that is not enough. As the High-End Nomu tries more or less eating Endeavor's fists and absorbing all of the damage, they're still locked in combat, flying in the air, getting higher and higher. Endeavor angles his flames upwards, letting Hawks know that that's exactly where he wants to go with the feathers, and Hawks starts shooting Endeavor and the High-End Nomu high up into the air so that Endeavor doesn't cause any damage of his next attack to the surrounding. And this is where Endeavor starts to realize the irony of this situation. He says, you who have been created to have multiple quirks, who are obsessed with strength, bioengineered human, you are me. From the past or from another future, burn up and be put to rest. And in that moment, Endeavor realizes all the similarities that he has between him and this monster, so by burning the High-End Nomu, Endeavor definitely thinks that he's burning his past, but I feel like the irony doesn't end there, because honestly, I think it's ironic that Endeavor looks at the High-End Nomu as him or his past that he has to burn, because had things gone a little bit differently, that very well could have been Touya that he was fighting as a High-End Nomu. Because again, we know that a lot of the people that Dabi ended up being in those weird kind of special areas that the doctor had all ended up becoming High-End Nomu later on. So if things had gone a little differently and Dabi ended up staying in that location and being a useless extra for Shigaraki, this very well could have been Endeavor fighting Touya, another part of his past that actually wants more than anything to burn itself down, along with Endeavor and everything that he holds dear. So by this point, all of Hawks' feathers have burned, and we see Endeavor and the Haya Nomu crashing down from the sky as Endeavor releases another Plus Ultra Prominence burn, and it literally looks like a meteor crashing down to the city as he releases everything that he possibly has to cook the Haya Nomu until it literally cannot regenerate anymore, calcifying all of its cells as he falls down to the ground and hits the ground really hard, leaving the Haya Nomu nothing more than a soulless burned husk. Now the interesting thing is that we know that Dabi was nearby when all of this was happening, and he was actually watching the fight, even concerned that Endeavor would lose when things got bad. Dabi says that this is because he wanted Endeavor to live to see the day that he revealed himself and everything crashed down around the #1 hero. But some people like to think, myself included, that was Touya deep down inside of Dabi actually showing concern for his father. Now, after the battle of the Haya Nomu, we have a very brief moment to maybe celebrate the ability that Endeavor was able to pull that off, but that's when Dabi actually confronts Endeavor and Hawks. And I really think at this point that Dabi might have been considering revealing himself to Endeavor at that moment, but Endeavor actually can't see Dabi all that well close up, especially because this is the first time that Dabi and Endeavor have ever been this close face to face. But Endeavor isn't actually able to see Touya all that well because he has some injuries from his fight. Obviously, he's missing one of his eyes, or at least the function of it, and he's just very woozy from the battle, so he isn't able to get a clear picture of how Dabi looks like. Maybe if he had, at some point between this battle and the Dabi's Dance episode, he might have been able to piece together and figure out exactly who Dabi was. Now, after the Haya Nomu fight is over and everything has more or less been dealt with, we even see Endeavor with a new scar on his face, but his eye is still intact. We see Hawks having a meeting with Dabi after, where Hawks gets really aggravated at Dabi for not letting him know that Nomu was going to be at that level of power, but Dabi says, hey, it is what it is, you're working on our side, you don't have to know everything, and oops, things could have went worse. At least he survived, right? You set up your friend, but at least he lived. And this just goes to show us that things are very odd between Hawks and Dabi, with Hawks being more or less a spy for the heroes working under the villains. But at the time, people weren't sure if Hawks was actually a spy for the villains working under the heroes. In our next video, we're going to be talking about the past of Keigo Takami, otherwise known as Hawks, going over exactly how he was raised and by who, all the way to the day that he became a hero, and why the Public Safety Commission is the kind of place that makes heroes like this end up working with villains at any cost. Leading up to our video about Lady Nagant, where we're going to do a very big deep dive on the Public Hero Safety Committee. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video about the start of Endeavor, the #1 hero, and please watch my spoiler video for My Hero Academia chapter 376, discussing what might potentially be the end of Endeavor.